Have you seen enough E31 yet? Well, there's more. Today we're going to be working on transmission bracket, we're going to be working on welding up the shifter, and we're going to be finishing up two of the brake lines that run from the brake master cylinder over to the DSC unit. Let's first recap as to what we've done over the last couple of episodes in a quick 1-minute talk. So what we have here is we have an updated welded front subframe. We need to finish completely welding that front subframe, but that's going to be for a later episode. We got our brake booster installed. We have our master cylinder installed, although it's not installed yet, but we do have it. And we have our DSC module that's now been installed, okay? That, we have to route the two brake lines over to here, so we at least have them formed. We've also completed our steering column and gotten it down to the rack. We've got our tie rod outputs that need to be completed because we have welding and CNC machining being done by Wolf Tech Fab. They're going to be finishing up those tie rod ends for us, and we're going to end up having this thing sitting. But everything is finished on the driveline side of things, and now we can start building up all the other ancillary items, such as radiator support and air conditioning lines and cooler lines and other radiators as well. So now that you got that, here's our transmission bracket. I made this a long time ago, and this is made out of aluminum. It was tack welded by my old former self who wasn't very good at aluminum welding, but I'm going to be final welding all this. All the gussets are going to be final welded, and this is going to be sitting good. Here is also the aluminum shifter. It's shortened shifter. As you can see, I had it on a slider. I cut it up in half, and I actually moved it along that length in order to get the exact position that I needed in. I checked to make sure that the position with the S85 sitting as it is was good, and it's perfect. So now all I have to do is stitch that up and finish up welding up this bracket too. So let's finish up and weld this right now and get it completed so we can move on to the next thing. Everything shifter is now absolutely completely done. The carrier has been completely welded, and then I pushed in the new bushings, brand new bushings. Of course, the selector rod was shortened along with it. I've got my clips, I've got my bushings, and other things here. This is a custom rear carrier mount. This guy is the rubber bushing that goes in between the shifter and the body for sounds and things like that. And then, of course, I've got two different shifters. As you can see, they are different. And I don't really know exactly which ones they are. I think one's a Z3 shifter. I think this one might be the Z3. But this one has a bit of a longer throw, so this one's going to feel a little bit more sporty. So I want to try both of them and see which one I like better, because they are very different. One has a little bit of a curvature to the above the ball. So I want to try both of them. I also finished the transmission mount bracket, and actually I installed that in the car, so I can't really show you that one right now. But now let's move on to the brakes and talk about the two lines that need to go from the master cylinder over to the DSC unit. All right, let's talk about DSC really quick. This is the DSC from the E90 rear wheel drive. This is the orientation that it needs to go with respect to the car's axis. We have our master cylinder right here, and we have our two outputs, our Vornen and our Hinton. Hinton is rear, Vornen is front, 25 millimeter for the front, 22 millimeter for the rear. On the actual DSC module, there are two larger tubes right here. Hinton is this guy here, and Vornen is right here. So the back, right here, needs to go straight back to this guy. And then this guy, the front, comes all the way around and goes right to this one. So we need to route those two, and we're going to remove them, but we just do need to route them just to make sure that we have no interferences and that we're at least moving forward with the brake lines. All right, so we got our brake lines here. We basically have two coming from the master cylinder, then two going into the DSC. These are 1/4 inch brake lines. These guys down here are 3/16 size, different size tubing, and these four then go to each of the four wheels. So I don't have any 1/4 inch line for this from the master cylinder to the DSC, so we're gonna have to wait on that. And I don't plan on doing the wheels anytime soon, so I'm just gonna have to put this on hold for a little bit and move on to the radiator. I don't know why, but I have a habit of actually saying the things that I'm going to do during the video before I actually do them. And then when I actually do those things, it's something completely different. So yeah, I mean, I'm just trying to keep you guys on your toes. Perhaps maybe I should record the intro of the video at the very end saying, this is what I will do. But at that time, I would have already done it. That would have been smart. Until then, that's what I was going to do, and this is what I'm actually doing. So here is the, these are the parts that are basically gonna need to get installed here. I'm gonna mock them up so that I can install the radiator, and of course the tubing for the, actually there's 2 sets of radiators inside of that big one, but that needs to get mocked up here so I know exactly where the mounts are going to go. Knowing where this lies is important to know where the bracketry should go, and if it doesn't interfere with the headlights or any of the other radiators I'm going to end up putting in here for cooling. So I just need to know where this needs to live so that I can make the custom brackets for it. So as you can probably tell, I was fiddling around with grinding things away in order to make the radiator fit exactly where I want, and I think I've achieved that objective. As you can see, the radiator height is near perfect. There's no interference with a potential interference with the hood. All 4 of the hoses actually fit perfectly. They're clocked correctly. They're not going to stretch too much, so the radiator isn't too far forward compared to the engine. It's not too far in compared to the engine. I've got 5.5 to 6 inches of clearance between the radiator itself and the crank pulley, so I have tons of room to put a shroud and a fan in there to keep the engine temperature exactly optimal. And if I were to take a straight edge and put it right across this guy there to this guy here, so you can see I'm kind of keeping that dimension right there the exact same as this dimension right there. You'll see that the radiator is pretty square with front and back, right? It's not twisting or anything like that. And as far as straightness down, it is actually in a pretty good height when you talk in terms of twisting as well. So now it's just a matter of rigging up the steel brackets that are going to be coming off of the frame rails to the radiator and getting it to sit in place. Once it sits in place, everything else just falls into place. A lot is dictated by the radiator. A lot. The location of the other radiators are all dictated by that. The tubing, the routing, the reservoir location is going to be dictated by that. I don't even know where the reservoir is going to go now, but I know it's going to go somewhere. We'll figure that out. But the radiator getting installed is going to be prime, so we need to get that fixed in place. So here's the idea for mounting. These are rubber bushings with a thread on one side, a male thread on one side and a female thread on the other. This is just a bolt that screws into it. This is a stud that comes out with a nut on it. The idea here is that this is going to end up sitting somewhere along that. It's going to end up screwing right to the side frame rail, and then there'll be an angle bracket that gets welded to the body of the header of the radiator. It's going to be an angle bracket with a hole, and that hole will accommodate the through bolt that I'm going to end up putting right through here, just like that, and it'll screw into the actual, just like that, right on the rubber mount. So that's the idea for both of them, and I'm gonna just try it. I'm gonna mark the radiator first, and then I'll start cutting and welding and seeing how this actually looks in application. I think it'll actually be very easy to install, and it'll prevent, I'll need a third mount to prevent it from swinging or rotating, but I think that that's gonna work. Radiator installation is complete. All the hoses match up with no awkward stretching of them. You can see that the clearance between here and here is about 5.5 to 6 inches. It's perfect, excellent. The height looks good. If I put this square tube right along and measure it right there, and then of course right there, the height is nearly completely unchanged and level from the left side to the right side. And I put that right there and put this guy right here. And the movement front, this guy goes right there, okay. So the movement from left to right is literally the same, right? The space between the end of the radiator and this guy, just using it as a ruler, you know, a rule of thumb. It looks very, very consistent. So that's all that I really wanted to do. Let's take this off. Let's take a look. It will move a little bit, right? So I might end up putting like another mount right here or something just to prevent it from twisting, but the tubes also help with that rigidity as well. But I'm not relying on the tubes, only the two brackets that install, and you can see one is right in there. Whoa, where are you? Yeah, right below, right there. And then there's another one right here. Right? So they're both there, they both are on rubber mounts, and they're both completely isolated from the chassis, which is good. You can hard mount it to the chassis if you want, but you don't have to. So the radiator, in my opinion, is basically installed, and now we can finish working on the next thing, which was what we started with, these two lines, and I can explain to you why it took so long to get those two lines installed onto these in a minute. Okay, so back to the brakes. What we need to do is install our brake line from the master cylinder, the two lines from the master cylinder, over to the DSC module. Let me show you really quick. So as I said earlier, we need to install two lines from the brake master cylinder over down into the DSC module located down there. Those two brake lines are not the typical 3/16 size that you see here. It's actually a 1/4 inch. You can see here the difference between one and the other is quite apparent. This is much bigger than that one. Therefore, this one requires 1/4 inch size tubing that goes directly from the master cylinder into the DSC. So all we need to do is cut a couple of pieces that are long enough to go from one to the other, flare one side, install our things, and then be good to go. I'll show you how to do that. But before we do, as I promised earlier, these are the brake master cylinder standoffs that I had installed and fabricated myself, that are threaded on either side, and they need to get faced so that the brake master cylinder mounts directly level and flush with the booster. So what we need to do is face these and get them to the exact same dimension as each other. And the best way to face them is with a lathe. Now, facing is the action of putting something in a lathe and using your cutting tool to make the front edge exactly flush. We'll be doing it on both sides, so that when we screw these things into the brake booster, that when you install the brake master cylinder onto the other side, it's going to sit flat and flush. And it also helps me dictate the length of these two to be exactly the same by using a precision machine like the lathe. Now, I just purchased this lathe, and it's going to help me out a lot with these types of precision things when it comes to steering or brake components. All right, so now that I've faced both of these guys down to the exact same dimension, as you can see there and there, now I can install these on the booster, install the master cylinder on that, and then I can start measuring and cutting for my brake lines. Now I've picked two brake lines here, about a length that's a lot longer than I need. I'm expecting to have some waste, and that's okay because better too long than too short. So I'm using what's called a pipe cutter. This is a brake line cutter, and the more you twist it, the more that the wheel pushes into it. So you basically do a couple of rotations, then you turn the wheel a little bit to add some pressure on the line. Right? A couple of rotations, another tiny turn, rotations, tiny turn, couple of rotations. And the reason that you cut your brake line like this as opposed to using like a cutoff wheel or something like that is because this is a very clean cut. There we go. It leaves a very clean cut, which makes a perfect foundation for flaring. And here we're going to be doing a bubble flare. That's what BMW uses. You have inverted flare, you have a single flare, you have double flare, and you have the bubble flare. So we're going to be using a bubble flare tool. And since we cut it longer than we need, it doesn't hurt to flare only on one side, install on that side, and then start making your bends. And then we'll cut the length that we need in order to meet the other side, which is probably going to end up being at the DSC. So what I want to do first is basically flare my line using a bubble flare tool and install onto the master cylinder. So when you do these types of operations, you always put the flare on first, right? And then you put your tool on. And this is a tool we're going to be using the 6mm. This is a 6mm or 1/4" setting. For most brake lines, it's 3/16 or I guess 4.75 millimeters. But in this case, we're just going to do one line here. I'm going to put this thing all the way through, all right? Just like that, until it's just right at the top end right there, because that is the amount of material that you need to flare. So you have this set just like that. Use a little bit of oil on the flare tool, just like this. Just a little bit, right? Just something to help ease the flaring process. Unscrew, then you take the tip of the flare tool and insert it into the tube until it clicks in, and it has to click in, right? Good. And then you tighten this so that it now holds up against the flare tool, and then you push this in order to do your flare. It's kind of where you need to use a little bit of muscle to hold it in. Good. Then you unscrew it just like that, right? Take it out. Take this out. Right? Just like this. Now you have your bubble flare with your tip. Okay, so we got both of our brake master cylinder lines routed to the DSC. As you can see here, we have them both done. We still have to do some massaging in the tighter bend areas and make sure that everything lines up, but this is very pliable, very easy to move around and clamp down when we're ready to take everything out and remove it and get this whole engine bay painted. But everything's basically installed here for the brakes. And that for me is it for this episode, guys. Thanks a lot. I hope you learned something. Take a look at the links in the description below for stuff about how to purchase some of these things, some of the tools, some of the stuff that I used. And I hope you learned something. My name is Frank Macaluso from Garageaholic, and I'm out of here, guys. Take it easy. Later.